Hello and welcome to the AgriFocus podcast from Agriland that takes a closer look at the issues that matter most to farmers across the country. I'm Francess McDonnell and joining me today is David Whelehan, Agricultural Technical Consultant with Vogelsang Ireland. He's also a part-time beef farmer in County Westmeath. And today we're going to be chatting about organic fertilisers and why they can be such a valuable resource to farmers. Now let's start with the fact that organic fertilisers can help farmers when it comes to the overall fertiliser bill, but there are very strict regulations in place when it comes to spreading slurry. So David, let's chat about what zones are currently open at the moment when it comes to spreading slurry.
Yeah, so Francis, under the Nitrates Action Plans, we have three different zones, Zone A, B and C. So the two zones that are currently open at the moment are Zone A and B. Zone A is spanning counties Carlow, Cork, Dublin, Kildare, Kilkenny, Laois, Offaly, Tipperary, Waterford, Wexford and Wicklow, and have been open since January 13th. Then when we go down to Zone B, which is opened on January the 16th, including counties Clare, Galway, Kerry, Limerick, Longford, Louth, Mayo, Meath, Roscommon, Sligo and Westmeath. Zone C then, which will encompass the northern half of the country, including counties Donegal, Leitrim, Cavan and Monaghan, are included to be opened on February 1st.
Okay, and the use of low-emission slurry spreading less has become compulsory on farms stocked at 100 kg of organic nitrogen per hectare from January 1st of this year. But conditions have been very difficult to start off with, haven't they, David?
Yeah, for sure. I suppose, there's 1,500 odd farmers approximately have been included in this extra regulation to be spreading with less equipment. Conditions up to Christmas have been pretty good, but, since we have two storms since Christmas, conditions have taken a serious deterioration where, farmers need to be mindful of when and where they're spreading and application rates and everything when they're spreading that slurry through organic. And
it doesn't really matter, I know we have to be very careful about the zone, but even if it is open, it's not a green light to go out and spread slurry because of the weather conditions.
Yeah, for sure. And, farmers are acutely aware of, spreading where conditions are not right and what can happen, let's say, through maybe slurry leaching and down into waterway courses and with runoff and things like that. So I think farmers are acutely aware that, that they're, especially that we see that there's a huge value now in organic fertilisers and they're very beneficial to land. Farmers are more inclined to wait until ground conditions are right and correct, especially around where soil temperatures are correct and grass is growing, which will essentially allow nutrients to be taken up by the plant in the ground. So it is important for farmers to be acutely aware not to spread, where soils are waterlogged, which would facilitate runoff down into watercourses, to, have a walk of their lands, make sure the conditions are right, and that will allow then the best benefit to be got from the soil, from the nutrients side of things, and also to protect the biodiversity side of things by protecting the watercourses and everything from contamination.
Yeah, and the best advice from Vogelsang Ireland is that it's essential to distribute organic fertiliser precisely, but not every option suits every farmer or every soil type. So what options are now available to farmers?
Yeah, so look, as a company, we manufacture a range of different products. You have dribble bar products, you have trail and shoe products, and you have, we have slurry separation systems as well, which is a technology that takes the fibre out of the slurry and it allows a farmer then to spread a very nutrient-rich, concentrated liquid that has all of available nitrogens and whatever in it that is very, very beneficial to the soil and allows a maximum uptake of nutrients for the soil while also reducing the emission losses into the atmosphere, N losses from it. Trail and shoe systems, more and more farmers, especially those that are in irrigation, there's an option there for them to have to spread with trail and shoe systems, which literally leaves a nice layer of slurry, thin layer of slurry with reduced fibres in it as well, and which is very beneficial to the ground. It actually, what it does, it parts the grass leaf sward and it lays and applies the slurry right down on the soil surface or the ground surface, less contamination of slurry onto the leaf sward, and it allows then the slurry to disperse down into the soil better and quicker. That then leaves a benefit to the atmosphere where there's less emissions being lost by nitrogen into the atmosphere. Dribble bars don't have the same effect. Dribble bars are fine, but it just applies the slurry on the top of the ground. But we now see more and more farmers that are inclined to take better use of their make better use of their nutrients, that more and more farmers are starting to go towards trail and shoes.
Okay. And we know that when we talk about anything to do with technology and equipment, that the financial supports are really important there. So from your perspective, do you think they're supporting farmers enough, or do you think there should be a little bit more leeway there?
Yeah, look, I suppose there was a little bit of contention by the fact that dribble bars have been taken off the grant aided support system, and that was a decision that was made by the Department of Agriculture. But nevertheless, when we look at what is available from a trail and shoe side, there are grants available via 40 and 60%, depending on what your farming circumstances are, whether you're in a partnership, whether you're a young trained farmer under the age of 41, or whether you're a female farmer. If you're a female farmer or a young trained farmer under the age of 41, you're entitled to a 60% grant. Everybody else is entitled to a 40% grant. The grants are there and the supports are there, and we will be keen to see them supports continued, because they're a very valuable tool. It'll help the country as a whole and the agricultural sector as a whole move towards the targets that have been set upon us, which is a reduction in the emissions overall by 2030.
Yeah, and I'll just remind our listeners that this week the Minister for Agriculture, Food, Fisheries and the Marine, Martin Hayden, announced that the latest tranche of the Targeted Agriculture Modernisation Scheme, that's TAMS 3, is now open for applications. This latest tranche of the scheme includes a new 60% grant for nutrient storage investments. But let's just go back to the equipment, because certain equipment works better on certain soils. And from your experience and from talking to farmers, what's best for certain types of conditions?
So, for example, in different types of soils, you'll see some farmers that would prefer to use a trail and shoe. In certain types of hilly conditions, some guys would prefer to use dribble bars. In certain types of soils where soils are heavy at certain times of the year, you will see farmers that will use pipe systems, especially at this time of the year where the water table can be higher. Ground conditions mightn't be just as suitable to go with a tanker and an applicator in certain parts of the country as opposed to others. So for that reason, given how conditions are, some guys will go with tractors and slurry tankers and applicators on the back. Other guys will go with pipe systems where, because their soil type is heavier and their soil type could be wetter, the risk of doing damage is less. And it's all about, less compaction, protecting your soil structure and your soil health by minimizing as much compaction and minimizing the damage that you're doing then, because then you're protecting your land and for your grazing and your silage systems moving forward. So farmers are acutely aware of all that, and they're very good at making them decisions to determine which system is suitable for the type of land or farm or part of the country that they're farming in.
Yeah, and David, we covered a story recently here in Agriland that according to Teagasc, the use of less equipment requires more skilled tractor drivers and machinery operators and more horsepower than the traditional splash plate spreading method. Is that something that you've heard back from farmers?
Yeah, look, there's an element of truth to that as well. Yeah, definitely. It's not just as simple as going out and spreading with open a hydraulic lever and a splash plate opens and you just drive. Like, you have an applicator on the back, whether it be a dribble bar or a trail and shoe, or in some cases an umbilical system. And what we have seen now, that according as farms are getting busier and probably labour is becoming less available, we see applicators from our one side of the business are actually starting to get bigger. So when I mean bigger, they're wider. So that takes more skill, takes more concentration. And obviously, a lot of young guys that are coming onto these systems have to be trained in advance to make sure that they're competent in the use of them and in the safe use of them as well. Because in certain parts of the country, it mightn't necessarily be all flatland. The topography might be where there might be some hilly terrain in it, and that requires a bit of skill and a bit of concentration. And that's where guys need to be trained. And there are a lot of very good skilled and operators out there, but it does take a certain amount of skill. Like with every task on farms or businesses anywhere in the country, there's always training that needs to be provided to make sure that guys and operators are confident in the efficient and also the safe use of these type of systems.
Yeah. And do Vogelsang Ireland, do they see examples of best practice in other parts of Europe that it's useful to translate into Ireland? Yeah,
look, we see different technologies across Europe in countries like Denmark and Germany and things like that, where not alone are they focusing on, let's say, the emissions, but they're also looking at air quality. So they're looking at ammonia losses. So they're looking at systems like the acidification of slurry, along with slurry separation, which can bring down the nitrogen losses in the atmosphere by up to 70%. So that's basically what you're doing with an acidification system, is you're actually monitoring the pH level of the slurries. and you're adding what we would call a sulfuric acid, which is a waste byproduct of the chemical fertilizer industry. You're adding an acid to that, which actually brings the pH level of the slurry to an optimum level. So by doing that, then when you bring it to an optimum level, you're turning the ammonia, which is a loss into the atmosphere, into an ammonium, which the soil benefits and goes down into the ground, and the plant gets a really good maximum nutrient benefit from that. So we see practices like that from across Europe slowly starting to filter in. We now have a situation where slurry separation is starting to become a very useful tool as part of a suite of measures in bringing down emissions on farms. So what slurry separation does is it takes the fibres. So we'll always see fibres in slurry. It will remove the fibres. So when you remove the fibres, you're left with a dry solid that contains your slow release organic nutrients that can be applied like farmyard manure to top dress on tillage ground or on grassland, for example. And then the liquid fraction that's from that separation process is your condensed, available, nutrient-rich fertilizer that's spread on the land. And there's a multitude of benefits from that because, when you're spreading that on your grazing paddocks or on your silage paddocks, because there's no fibre, it's not contaminating your leaf sward. When you spread that with a trailing shoe, it's going straight down onto the base of the soil. Then the uptake by the plant is really, really good. So you have a really fast reaction nutrients-wise from the plant, but also you have no contamination on the leaf sward. So from a herd health point of view, that's really good because you're not contaminating your silage stocks coming back in for your winter feed. So that, reduces bacteria, can reduce mycotoxins and things like that. So there are a multitude of benefits alongside the fact that if, Francis, you're taking out your fibres out of the slurry, you're creating up to a maximum of 20% extra storage in your tanks. So, for example, if a pinch point comes in December or January on farms where slurry tanks are getting full, by separating that slurry, you're actually creating more space in. So it's taking some pressure off in some regards.
And do you find, David, that farmers are adopting that?
The farmers are very resilient. We find it, and I see it as farmers myself and talking to farmers on the ground and being on farms. Farmers are very resilient and they're very good to adopt new practices. They're progressive, and that's one thing I always see. They're very quick to adapt new measures and new principles that will leave their farms more efficient from, let's say, a labour point of view, from a time point of view, but also from a financial and environmental side as well. Farmers are very mindful of, what their obligations are, and they're always good to embrace new technologies and practices.
Yeah. And just on the application rates, because there is a theory around when you should spread and what you should spread.
Yeah, look, personally, from my own view as a farmer, looking at that, I would always be inclined to wait until conditions are right, as in your soil temperature is up, your grass is growing. And by doing that, little measures like that. Now, we all know sometimes farmers might have to go a little bit earlier because there might be pinch points where tanks are full and they'll have to go when the season is opened just to get that bit of relief, to get the tanks down lower. And guys will just spread what they need to spread to allow that without wasting their slurry, because everybody knows now that, the nutrient benefits of slurry are really good, and slurry is not a byproduct anymore. It's actually an asset. So guys, are careful about how and when they spread that. There's no such thing as, just emptying a tank it out. No, the guys they're very selective about where they're spreading it and about how much they're spreading. So, guys are good to see that, and girls are good to see that, the important thing is wait until the soil temperature is up, wait until the grass is grown. And when you do that, you're getting a better you're getting a better reward from your slurry by doing that. So they're things that farmers are always good at doing and even improving all the time.
Yeah, and as a farmer yourself, it's something you're very mindful of.
Absolutely, yeah. Like at the end of the day, despite what sometimes what we read in social media about farmers are custodians of the land. It's a generational thing where farms are passed from farm to farm, and me as a farmer myself, all you're trying to do is pass the land on the farm down in a better condition than what you got it down to the next generation.
But it is reassuring that there is the technology in the pipeline, or it's already here in some cases,
sure,
that is going to support and help farmers.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, technology is changing all the time. Like what was in vogue 10 years ago is very much, different now, and it's evolving all the time. And even, as a manufacturer of slurry technology products, like, we, as part of our overall factory process in our head office, factory in Germany, there's an R&D side where there's always new technologies coming up all the time, and tweaks and changes made to existing technologies. So, for example, on the tillage side or the crop side of things, we see more and more farmers are inclined to start top dressing crops with slurry in the springtime to get a maximum benefit from spreading nutrients on the growing crop, and that allows them then to reduce, in certain cases, the chemical fertilizer amount that they're applying to these crops. So they're getting the benefit of using what was essentially one time a byproduct, which is your slurry, which is now an acid, and they're also getting the benefit of reducing their chemical fertilizer usage. So that's good for the financial end of the business, for the farm in question and business, and also from the environmental side of it. Because at the end of the day, we all have signed into legally binding targets for 2030. Whether we're going to achieve them is another grey area or question mark. But yeah, I do know from seeing on farm on the ground, farmers are very, very good and mindful of them targets that are there and what they need to do individually to kind of reduce their emission levels on farm.
And of course, we're all going to be keeping a very close eye on the weather to make sure conditions are optimal for spreading slurry over the next few weeks. But for now, I'm going to have to leave it, and I'd like to thank David Whelehan from Vogelsang Ireland for joining me on this edition of AgriFocus. Thanks for listening, and please don't forget to rate, review this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.